Before we start, we have to do some housekeeping because we do have a majority of a quorum in the room for the LRA board. So we will need to call a meeting to order. So it is, just for the record, 5:59. And we have, I'll go through roll call of the board guys to start this. So Bill Wright, here. Bill McFadden, here. Ron Smith, here. Kevin Rybel, Paul Hartman, Bill Robinson, Don Crawford, and Steve Kiefer. So we'll just have to adjourn the meeting then at the end of this presentation. Rob will do the welcome.
Thanks very much, Mara. Thanks everybody for joining us here in person and also online. It's a pretty exciting meeting for us. Following on from the first public meeting that we had where we started explaining and showing the process to members of the public. This is kind of the culmination of all that effort. So I'm just going to run through the agenda for us. Next up will be Linda Balcom. She's going to take us through the planning and process considerations. After that, Shane Peck with WSP will explain how we got public input and what the process was for obtaining that input. Following Shane's presentation will be Scott Sigmund, who will talk to us about the freight and industrial market assessment that was undertaken in order to come up with the findings for this particular presentation. Alan Myers and Hardeep Kajar with WSP will then take us into the actual alternatives analysis, where we'll be looking at the different alternatives for the reuse of Parcel 20. We'll then go into questions and feedback, and Mara will tie it all up for us at the end. I'd like to call Linda to come up and do her bit. Thanks, Linda.
Well, I just get to reiterate the welcome. Thank you all so much. Again, we're all pretty excited about this. Shockingly, next slide, please. So the agenda looks a lot like the planning process, because what you heard was all of the elements that are going into and how we develop this plan. So it's not just one element. For those of you who are here in the room, and you'll get to see more of this as part of the presentation. Obviously, this is a culmination of months of work with specialty expertise. It's an analysis of the existing conditions. Scott will review the market analysis he's done, along with some support from Martin and Associates, to look at the impacts and what we might be looking at from a potential standpoint in terms of how we could use Parcel 20 and what the market will support. We looked at key infrastructure issues. And then, of course, Hardeep will then be reviewing how we might look at various layouts for port alternative considerations. So all of these represent opportunities and constraints. So all of those were all presented in terms of the potentials of those things were all included then with the public process. So we want to be sure that we incorporated as part of our technical planning what the public was looking for as part of this process. So it's not just a sure, we just want your input. It is, let's carefully consider how we can marry up the priorities, which were indicated to be economic development, sustainable economic development, port and multimodal, which were equally balanced with recreational uses, ecotourism, environmental sustainability. So we're pretty excited that we've got a plan that marries these concepts well together. But again, at how this works is then, as we look at these alternatives, we'll actually be working with the LRA board, because while this is our first presentation of the alternatives altogether, it will actually be the Joe Carroll LRA who will make the final decision for what they believe will be in the best interests of both the Savanna Industrial Park as well as the larger community. So real quick context, because I do love a good map. So next map. Yeah, there we go. So I know you're all familiar with it, but it's always good to see it again. But again, we're talking about the reuse planning for Parcel 20. So you can see Depot Road coming in there. You can see the full extent of the installation, and my little red bubble down there is parcel 20. Okay, with that, I'd actually like to introduce Shane, who's going to review our public process.
Thank you, Linda. It was incredibly important to LRA and to our entire project team to make sure that we were hearing from the public and also key stakeholders about their vision for Parcel 20. So here's where you can see all of the public outreach efforts we made to make sure we were reaching out, educating folks and giving them the opportunity to provide input. Sent out multiple stakeholder emails. We had technical advisory committee meetings. We've had 2 of those, 2 public meetings, posted notices in all the major newspapers in the area, and sent news releases out to the news media in the area, as well as personal visits and phone calls from Myra and Rob. Go to the next slide. Part of the ways people could provide public input were through the industrial park website, through the comment form. You can't see, it's under Allen up there in the corner. We also had a survey that linked from the web page, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute, so as people could email in their comments, and we've provided comment opportunities through the public meetings, both online and here in person. So this was our interactive survey that was available online. This ran from mid-September to the end of October. So you can see it, you can learn information about the planning study. This screen allowed you to move chips into the various pots to indicate what your priorities were and to give different weights to those priorities. We'll talk about some of the results that we saw out of these screens. There was also an interactive map. So there across the top, you can see various categories. You can pull those down to locations on the map and provide comment on those specific locations. Again, we'll talk a little bit about what we heard through that. And then you could also just give us your general kind of vision for Parcel 20 within the industrial park. You can go to the next slide. Sure. So we had 17 total participants in the survey, and one of the questions at the end, people could tell us how they would describe themselves, what organization they're with, or otherwise. Some folks didn't choose to let us know, so that's the farthest bar on the far right hand side. But the biggest category was business/industry at 4, followed by governmental officials at 3, area residents and industrial park tenants were 2, and then one person indicated they were a member of the general public. So had a lot of interest in business and development, as well as our governmental representatives and then key stakeholders and members of the public. So this was the screen where you saw them pulling the chips into the various priorities. So it came out pretty clear that priorities related to economic concerns, economic development, job creation, port and multimodal development were the top weighted priorities. Those were followed by environmental stewardship, sustainable development, recreation, and then what's the one on the far end? Ecotourism. It's hard to see from this angle. So yeah, there was a pretty clear priority given to economic development, things that would improve the economy and create jobs. So this was the interactive map that I showed. People could toggle between the street view and then what you see there, which is the satellite view. So that's what we're showing. Those are the icons that were all placed in various locations. Not everybody chose to give us comments. So what you're seeing here are the comments that were submitted in the various locations. You can also see what each of the icons stood for up there across the top. So again, economic development, job creation, and multimodal development, port and multimodal development, those were the big categories that came through on this map, in addition to recreation and environmental stewardship. With that, I'll bring up Scott Sigmund.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you all who are in attendance both here and online. As a part of the freight and industrial development, we wanted to get a sense of what is, what has been, and then look out to the future prospectively, what could be the kinds of cargoes. And so we went through a variety of approaches several methodologies, reviewed the past 70-page report, the 15,000 location waterway database that covers all the ports and terminals, private facilities along the waterfront, on rivers from the Ohio to the Arkansas to the Carnes to the Mississippi, just to get an overall view of what kinds of facilities are there or have there been. Some of them and decommissioned, are vacant or idle. Others are very dynamic and operating at full capacity and looking to expand. So then getting more granular, looking here from mile marker 479 up to Dubuque, we wanted to get a sense, and some of you had a chance to preview the photographs and the arms and legs and terminals that are here in the area, the immediate market, in order to get a sense of what could be developed and what could be attracted, what those base cargoes are. Enterprises within 76 miles were also evaluated from a general business database in the categories that are manufacturing, natural resources, so everything from quarries that are within 76 miles every direction to the kinds of wholesalers that might be moving goods, whether it's steel or sand and gravel. And so that gave us a good sense, knowing that the core is ag and natural resources. And in the next slide or so, we'll see that those are the kinds of things that move on the river. But until you have a dock, you don't really have a port. You can have what we have today is the Savanna Industrial Park. And so reached out to those in the community, existing participants in this process, ranged across numerous industries, and gave us great insights into the kinds of opportunities that are on the horizon that they foresee from their commercial experience. And so we also wanted to vet these as what is practical and what, as we look out to the future, makes sense for possible future development at the local depot. And so there's the map of the river. The Army Corps navigation chart gives you some sense of where we are here at the depot at Savanna, and the accessibility both upriver and downriver. Next slide, please. Wanted to start out as part of that practical consideration at a level of what gets loaded in a single truck, or what gets loaded in 50 trucks over the course of a day, or 50 rail cars in a week. And so on the basis of tonnage, on the basis of the numbers of rail cars, annually, what does that mean? If you're loading 10 rail cars per week up in the gray bar, for example, that equates to about 500 rail cars. 10 barges per week results, because you're only operating 40 weeks a year, at about 400 barges. So considering that the river is closed, it's frozen, we wanted to implant that practicality of what is the potential tonnage that would move over the course of a week or a year, and just get a sense of how much traffic does that really mean? How much revenue is behind those numbers? How much tonnage? What would the piles of sand or gravel, or the bins full of corn or soybeans, or new commodities like wind turbines or project cargoes have to be considering when you're looking at how many rail cars are you going to need, and consequently how much storage. Next slide, please. So looking at what has moved in the past, We had the evaluation in 2019, pre-pandemic, figuring that's a better baseline than 2020 and 2021 data wasn't fully available. So in terms of the top commodities, 100% in this reach of the river is 11 commodities. 7 of them, really 8 of the 11 are ag related. And those are the outbound commodities. In the inbound, there are 30 commodities. And 84% of them, because there's that sliding percentage, are made up 84% in just the top 10. And so as a part of the core base of what's moving, it really boils down to about 10 or 11 commodities. Yeah, there's a long list of 30, but it's largely ag, it's largely been natural resources. And while that would serve as a base of cargo for any new port, new investments, new business development, the potential and the opportunity really seems to exist with some new cargo, some new commodities, and to help generate additional manufacturing, whether it's chemical, industrial, not so much consumer products, but more on the industrial side. Next slide, please. And so we categorize these conventional markets, the primary 6, where grain, salt, scrap were the kinds of commodities that we talked to those industry professionals about to get their ideas. What do they foresee coming down the road? And they tended to lean toward being more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, greener, different materials. So material science is increasingly important, whether it's carbon fiber or hemp fiber or other commodities that we don't always think of today as traditional, because they're not and haven't been. But opportunity or prospective freight exists in such things as an organic digester or wind energy or solar energy, renewable energy, green industry, to be able to nurture those kinds of commodities and those kinds of categories for the cargoes of the future. And next slide, which brings us to the actual layout of the terminal, where I'd like to introduce Alan on the screen and Hardeep Gajar here in the room. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. So the next step in our work was to translate from the market analysis that Scott just described into a design plan that gave us an idea for what the physical and functional options were for Parcel 20. So the process that we went through was to identify port and related uses that were consistent with the overall vision for the property. We looked at quantifying the levels of cargo demand and the required characteristics to accommodate that cargo demand in terms of water access, rail access, truck access, amount of acreage, amount of developed covered versus open square footage. We looked at the site in some detail, the upland areas for the location, access, function, ownership, environmental factors, making sure that we could build a relationship between any functions we accommodated at Parcel 20 for marine activities and landside support necessary to make those functions workable and feasible and worth doing. We incorporated non-cargo functions as well, environmental enhancement, recreational access, also boat repair, maintenance and layup operations, which is not cargo activity, but it is maritime related because it's critical to keep maritime activity functional, to have the equipment in state of good repair. The outcome that we've come to is that, and we'll share with you in a little bit, Hardeep will describe is 2 preliminary concepts dealing with different cargo options. A light cargo use of Commander's Pond and a full cargo use of Commander's Pond. Both of these are integrated with non-cargo recreational and public access and enhancement opportunities. Next. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. There's a lot of numbers here, but we did look at ways. This is an example of ways, I should say, that we translated the use matrix that Scott just presented into acreage requirements. We looked at different grain terminals, fertilizers, salt, minerals, scrap, heavy lift cargoes, and the amount of acreage we thought could be supported by those uses, and the amount of cargo handling that would be generated over the wharf through vessel calls. Next. And we looked at expanded green opportunities, non-traditional uses, things like container on barge, organic digester, grain byproducts processing, alternative fuels, metal milling, wind energy, solar energy, and other uses. Next. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Hardik, who will run you through the different levels of analysis we undertook.
All right, thank you, Alan. So as we saw before in the presentation, we looked at the opportunity and the constraints at the site to know the existing conditions of the facility. So what we did was we brought in the information that we had in the GIS that was available to us and in our layout diagram to consider the opportunities and constraints. So we looked at things like the buildings, existing buildings, the streets, the existing rail lines, where the LRA property is, what LRA owns. We also looked at the site contours as well, and identified whether they categorize as the opportunity, like the rail lines provide rail access, or are they constraints for certain areas, the contours, the site topography is such. So we looked into all that. Next slide. We also looked at things that are in terms of environmental elements, such as the groundwater plume. We also looked at the explosive arc and how that relate to the overall existing footprint of the site. Next slide, please. Okay, so as Alan mentioned, we looked at not just the terminal layout for the cargo facilities, but also looked at the non-cargo operation in terms of recreational use as well. So things like the proposed recreational area, the boat launch, the trail, as well as the lookout points and how that fits into the overall development. So there's this use, the commercial use, as well as the recreational use of the site. And just to give you some example on the next slide, things like raised walkways, trails, lookout points, boat ramps, canoe launch or kayak launch. And here are some of the pictures that we got from the IIPD CMAP plan on how they look like for the raised walkways in terms and the lookout points and things like that. Next slide. Yeah. So this is the very first option for the commander spawn, as we call it, the commander spawn light, on how it will be developed and how that matches with the conventional cargo mix that was presented earlier. You have over here in the commander spawn area an 800-foot wharf that will be able to handle a couple of long 400-foot barges, 300 to 400-foot barges. Along with that, we have the backland area available for the haul road, the conveyor system, the liquid bulk pipeline. We also have the dry dock facility included in here for repair and rehabilitation for tugs and barges that will be provided support in the backlands for the equipment and the first point of rest. Behind that, you see the area for project cargo and metal handling for heavy cargoes that cannot go on the haul road and needs to be put directly on the rail. So that would be stayed right next to or behind the wharf. And then you see the overall dredge area that's needed. That's about 17 acres in this option. Along with that, we are also showing, sorry, go back to the previous slide. Along with that, we are also showing how that fits into with the recreational usage of the facility nearby as well. So you can see that a portion on the drawing. Next. The next one is the commander spawn full option, where we are expanding the barge handling facility to provide an L-shaped wharf that will be able to handle a total of 4 different or 4 simultaneous barges. And the wharf is large enough to have to handle a large mobile harbor crane. Along with that, you also have a better fleeting area within the pond itself for repair and as well as for other barges that are coming in to be serviced. So overall, this is a 44-acre dredge cut, which includes 16 acres of aquatic habitat restoration for fish. And then along with that, you also have the recreational area blended into the development as well. Now, how all these things, the Commander's Pond Full and the Commander's Pond Light, comes into the picture of an overall campus or a green campus layout. So behind the Commander's Pond area, you can see all the development for handling and storage of the cargo. See the container storage or metal storage up here. You also have storage for fertilizers, grains. You go further up, you have storage for grain and the co-products. Further north you go, you have storage for the organic digester, which will be used for development, for manufacturing or production of natural gas and hydrogen, and the green hydrogen. You have the solar PV area along with the wind component manufacturing as well. And then also have the chemical and the salt handling, which is needed in this area. We are also showing the barge fleeting area in the slough for incoming and outgoing barges as well. That I will hand it out for next steps.
So after receiving all of this information, what do we do with it? And what are our next steps? So you'll see we've got on there our public meeting today to present this on the Parcel 20 reuse alternatives. One of the things we need to do after this is to meet with our board and look at the alternatives that were presented tonight for Parcel 20. We will need to keep in mind the notice of interest process. That was where the Port Authority provided a letter of intent for a public benefit conveyance over portions of Parcel 20. They are going to be talking about whether they want to move forward with that process or not. And that is something that we will need to know when we finish our reuse plan based on how the Army transfers property. So Kevin and his board will be talking about their desire to or not to receive any property in Parcel 20 through a public benefit conveyance. And what that is for folks that don't know is it's sponsored by the U.S. Department of Transportation Maritime Administration. So the transfer would go through that agency for the Port Authority to use it in perpetuity for port-related activities. So they'll be looking at what the pros and cons are of that program. And we will need to take that into consideration before we submit our final reuse plan to the Army. So we will be meeting with our board members actually tomorrow to discuss the details of these two layouts. And when we get the answer on the notice of interest, we will throw that into our plan and hopefully get our plan to the Army by January. What happens when the Army receives the plan is they will review it. They'll look at it and determine whether it's feasible in their eyes. And they will then work on the transfer process. So as always, this is not a quick process. They will have to do a NEPA, the environmental analysis on the property based on reuse. So that could take at least a year. And then after they look at that data, they will still have to do their finding of suitability to transfer and their quick clean deed process. They've got some public processes that they need to do too. So in honesty, I don't believe we can, I don't think we'll see this property any sooner than 2 years. So that's kind of what our next steps are. So thanks, everybody, for hearing the presentation, listening to the presentation, and if there's any questions from the audience or anybody online, we can take those.
We have one.
Yeah.
From Amy Martell.
Yeah.
The question is, why is rail only 50 weeks instead of 52 weeks?
Can you answer that, Scott?
Sure. And in order to assure that I can be heard, I step up to the microphone. For round numbers, the 52-week operation would be traditional at a rail terminal, but there are sometimes weeks where rail service might not be as reliable. Thinking usually around holidays. When we look at rail data, it's oftentimes reported on a monthly basis, and the number of weekdays in a month sometimes matters. That some months you may have 23 weekdays, others more or less. Just depends on where the weekends fall and where those operations are. So for the purposes of that slide, comparing numbers of rail cars, numbers of barges on a weekly basis, I cited the 50 instead of 52, but it was really for comparison and a sense of how much cargo is moving, how much tonnage, if it's 1 or 5 or 20 or 100 in a week, and for comparison. Thank you for the question.
Any other questions here in the audience? I don't have a question. I say that I appreciate that Port Authority is getting involved with the schools. Work that with Port Authority operates. Now, years ago, when I did a lot of traveling, I thought, well, we're only dealing with water. Well, no, buildings or whatever, spot. And, the ability to go after, you need this. So with two groups working together, we have maps make it happen.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't work.
Oh, no, I agree.
It's not working together.
That's what.
Investigate this.
Well, I agree with you.
No difference.
You know, have a service.
Yeah.
Yep, it's the Port Authority is a municipality, so it's a nice thing to have when you're trying to develop something so large and having your own utilities involved. So, yeah, we hope that everything continues moving forward. And if there are any other questions, we could.
Just like the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great vision to have. That is correct. We're very thankful for their hard work on that. One more question.
So we have another question. It's an anonymous question for the proposal. Will the board be working with existing landowners that have their footprint and proposed items on the maps?
I can try to answer that, but if Kevin would like to answer that.
For the proposal, will the port be working with existing landowners that have their footprint and proposed items on the maps?
So there was areas on the map, and we can go back to that if you want, that the layout for this design overlaps property that they already own.
All of us in people to put time and money to buy already here. Got a lot of local buy-in for this. If there's something on somebody's piece of ground, you know, and they want to keep doing what they're doing there, I mean, we've got to readjust.
But hopefully you could hear that response. Let us know if you didn't. Good.
All the questions for
Okay, okay.
I just want to comment. I really enjoyed the presentation. I love the different ideas that you have. Phase and larger scale, and I liked the walkways. That was nice. Everybody loves nature and tourism, and if it's a way to bring people to the area, that's just one more element to bring people to the area as well. And then if you have something like what other businesses want to build upon it.
Yeah,
I
we,
mean, like they have that Fish and Wildlife Museum in Dubuque. I mean, what a great, we have that aquatic habitat. What if they did a museum like they have in Dubuque? Like that place is awesome.
Yeah.
For its families, they have passes like, you know, for kids in the summertime and, you know, hotel or, you know, like other things to follow. Glad I was able to stop and visit.
thank you. We're glad you were too.
If we could prove to other industries that we can have a community support in the United States, we're starting from square one with it. We're trying to prove that industry and environment can work together, you know, so it's good for all of it. It's absolutely, you know, walking pass through it, and prairie grass and everything.
Yeah, all of those elements are very able to work very closely, you know, especially when you're looking at a sustainable development. So, yeah.
Is there another project like this anywhere in the United States that's already doing something similar or?
Not port wise, most of
Like
the,
it would be like first.
yes.
So that's.
So I think the last port that was built was probably 50 some years ago, Kevin, am I correct?
And what's so nice about it is
Oh,
all push together and you go visit somebody out here. Like, oh my God, the potential here.
yeah, yeah. Scott's got a comment.
Yeah. Thank you. I was actually the first interim port director at a place called the Port of Kate's Landing, which was a $20 million investment by the federal government in the furthest northwest corner of Tennessee. There's a 9-mile channel that runs kind of a slackwater harbor into the Port of Kate's Landing. And they built a 30,000 square foot warehouse and a modern dock for considering the river's 100-year floodplain. And so above the 100-year floodplain is the port, the nation's newest port. 3,000 acres surround it. And they currently have an application before the Surface Transportation Board to get rail to come to the port. Currently, rail is about 2 miles away. And so to stub in from the main line is to really launch into this kind of a development. I also worked at the ports of Indiana some years ago for several years, and they have a number of ports, 3 actually, that the state is authorized to oversee. 1 is on Lake Michigan and 2 are on the Ohio River. And each of those facilities on the Ohio River has about 1,200 acres. And so it's a variation on this theme, but one of those at the ports of Indiana is really a steel campus. And we have conceived these, the the port here at the depot as a kind of campus where the enterprises there could have and find synergies among and between themselves. In Indiana, there's a company that does alloys and pickling of steel and galvanizing and stamping. And so they work together, one to the other, servicing their various elements in the steel business. Others, some with bars, some with coils, some with raw steel. And the port on Lake Michigan actually has a steel mill. That's not to say they don't also all have grain. And they have scrap facilities. And so within the 1,000-acre footprint at those ports, this is a comparable model to say there's grain process, there's potential for grain processing. The green elements that we're gearing toward, that we're hearing more about, are pretty exciting as we consider that 2030, 2040, 2050 time horizon and out into the future, 2100, where what will this port look like? What will the community look like? And to have that vision to bring industry and investments and resources, human resources on the job side and financial resources on the investment side, to make more of a port, more of a campus, more of a industrial community, so that one business can benefit from the other. On the in the remotest way, fertilizer ultimately supports grain, but one's an input, one's an output. As you process that grain, you get animal feed and vegetable oil or other derivatives. Those are co-products. There's almost no such thing anymore as a byproduct. It's, can you make economic value from so many of the elements? Even in that steel making, slag is a part of valued commodities that someone else can use. Fly ash, while coal has diminished significantly in its use, what is it, what commodities, and that's a part of this discussion, is what can we find to replace some of that tonnage that can be valuable for communities and for industry for the future. So, yes.
Do you see the logging?
Yeah, logs and logging, processing of lumber, all the way down to dimension stock, the kinds of things that we make furniture or furnishings out of, are increasingly an important commodity, even down to then wood chips. As we talk about energy, renewable energy, wood chips for any number of purposes are increasingly important. You see barges full of wood chips moving on the system.
Because I see not just the semi. Now we have one.
And the export market, yeah, the export market for especially red oak, American red oak and American white oak are very popular in both Europe and Asia for furniture, for veneer. They slice that super thin to the millimeter kinds of widths and really slice it. And it's highly prized. So there's potential. That's also possibly a part of the container market, as you can load those heavier than you can over the road or over the rail, because the road and the rail limit the weight capacity in a container. Container can technically hold, it's engineered to hold 32.5 tons, metric tons. But in my model earlier, we used truck or container at 22.5 tons. Now, a lot of loads go lighter, balloon freight, light freight, relatively light freight, but could be loaded heavier up to the capacity of the box. If you put it on the water, if you then barge it to the deep water ports at the mouth of the Miss. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, once again, thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate all of your comments, and we will have to adjourn our board meeting before we leave out of here. So if Bill or Ron could make a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. No, second it. Okay, motion adjourned. I don't have the time, but if somebody could, 6:44, okay. And we are good to go. So once again, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate your input into all of this, all of the project, with the first visioning session and until now. So everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, thanks.